Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Our Take, a podcast you can trust. I'm your host, LukeMan97, and before we get started today, I just wanted to let you guys know if you hear like a weird buzzing sound in these podcast episodes, it's probably because something's going on with my mic. I'll try to see what's causing it, but I don't know if I'll be able to figure it out. So bear with me on that. Hopefully, it'll be fixed before too long. Anyways, the subject of today's podcast is going to be hazardous waste. Now, I know last podcast we talked about normal solid waste disposal, but today we're going to be talking about the more toxic kinds of waste that you wouldn't just want to put in a landfill or incinerate. So first of all, let's talk about the different kinds of hazardous waste. So obviously there's the chemicals you use in your house to clean or different stuff like that. There's aerosols, propane gas cylinders. There's automotive fluids like oil that you put in cars, gasoline, coolant, power steering fluid, different fluids you put in a car. There's batteries and electronics, which we kind of touched on that in the last episode about e-waste. There's fluorescent bulbs, or thermostats or thermometers, and we'll touch on why those are toxic later. And there's paint. We'll also talk about that later. And of course, let's address the elephant in the room, nuclear waste. Let's start out with nuclear waste because that is a very big issue today. Nuclear waste can come from one of two sources: a nuclear power plant, or when the government makes nuclear weapons such as a nuclear bomb. So basically what happens is when a nuclear power plant is operating, they use fuel rods of usually uranium or plutonium to feed into the reactor that makes reactions, and that produces power. But after the fuel rods have been used, they're called spent fuel rods, and they have to be stored, because the thing with radiation is it lasts for a very, very long time. So usually the way they store these spent fuel rods is they store them either in pools on site, like an actual swimming pool. They just put the rods down into it in big crates. Or if the rods are less radioactive, they store them above ground in dry casks, basically just plastic containers. So there's the spent fuel rods, and then there's also when a nuclear power plant shuts down, because they can't operate forever because they eventually wear out, and because of that stuff's so toxic, they have to shut down before something catastrophic happens. So when they shut down, there's a lot of waste from that plant shutting down. So they have to remove all the things from that plant that could be radioactive and basically store them, because radioactive things do not just go away very fast. And then of course after they take all that stuff out, they can just demolish the buildings. But you must clean up all that stuff first. And there's also, so yes, power plants can cause a lot of radioactive toxic waste. And then let's talk about the nuclear weapons. So when they build nuclear weapons like atomic bombs and things like that, of course there's waste from that, just like there's waste from nuclear power plants, and that waste must be stored. But also when they do tests on these nuclear bombs, like in the ocean and things like that, nuclear radiation can be released into the atmosphere, which that is not good. So, and the government rationalizes this by saying that it's necessary for defense, which honestly they're probably right, because so many countries have nuclear weapons now that if you don't have them, you're kind of vulnerable. So yeah, I can see why that'd be necessary for defense. My opinion on nuclear power plants themselves is that we should not be using nuclear power or as a power plant resource, and we shouldn't be messing around with nuclear power either, because think about how long that waste is going to be around before it finally stops being toxic. That's a long time. I mean, I didn't look up uranium half-life completely, but uranium half-life is a very long time. And basically the government has promised to build a large storage facility in Nevada for all this nuclear waste, but because of politics and stuff like that stalling it, they haven't been able to even start yet. So all of these power plants and things have just had to store their waste on site, which eventually that's not going to be as good. Another area of nuclear waste is there less toxic things like radiation machines or x-ray machines from hospitals. Those have to be stored as well because they have radiation. So basically the way they handle these ones is they put them in crates and they just bury them somewhere because they're not as toxic as like stuff from nuclear power plants. So it's acceptable to just bury them. Well, that was the big part of this, the nuclear waste problem, but there's also smaller pieces of the hazardous waste puzzle. I didn't say this at the start, I probably should have, but it says here the definition of hazardous waste is waste that has substantial or potential threats to public health or the environment. So it's not just people that they have to worry about as far as hazardous waste storage. They also have to worry about plants and animals because you don't want to kill the environment either. So the way this works is, the next one is household cleaners, like I talked about. Aerosols, basically just stuff we use to clean. It's not crazy toxic, but it is pretty toxic. So what I would recommend, and what I've seen recommended in books and on websites, is a lot of times in your county there's a hazardous waste pickup day. So just take it there when the pickup day happens. If that's not a thing, only buy as much cleaners and household hazardous wastes as you need to do stuff in your house. Don't buy any excess, and try to use them all up before you recycle the container or throw out the container, because the less we let go into landfills and the environment, the better. As far as automotive fluids like oil and coolant and stuff like that, a lot of times at auto repair stores like AutoZone or O'Reilly's, they have an oil recycling program where if you change your oil and it's like dirty oil, you take used oil to that auto parts store and they have a big tank there where you can pour it in and they store it, and then I think eventually they send it off to a refinery where it can be purified and turned back into good oil again. So that is a good way to keep from wasting those. As far as other fluids, just try to use as little as possible. I don't think there's any recycling for coolant and things like that, but just try to use as little as possible. As far as batteries and electronics go, e-waste in other words, we already touched on that in the solid waste video. Usually what they do is they use processes to remove the valuable metals from the computers and whatnot, and a lot of times it can be done in a toxic way to workers, especially in third world countries, so it's best if it's done in a country where we have the proper safety equipment so everybody is safe. As far as batteries, including car batteries, a lot of times batteries can be recycled and sent back to a plant where they're made, where they extract the good resources from the batteries and then use those to make more batteries, so it's less waste and less new product used. With car batteries or any like lawnmower battery you buy, when you buy the new battery, if you bring the old battery back in, they usually give you like $15 off or something like that as a core charge, because they can take the core out of that old battery that's still good and use it to make new batteries at a facility. Fluorescent bulbs and thermostats and thermometers, what those three have in common is they all have mercury in them. Now, mercury is a very toxic liquid, but it can be both a gas and a liquid. When it's heated up, it can be a gas, but if it's cooled and condensed, it can be a liquid. Mercury is very toxic if you ever breathe it in, so that's why the fluorescent bulbs, not curly Qs, but CFL bulbs, thermostats and thermometers that have mercury in them should all be treated with care and disposed of properly. Paint these days is not very toxic, but back in the day they used lead paint, which was very toxic. So don't ever let your child ingest lead paint or any of that, because that can be very toxic. I hope this video is informational to you. Everybody, remember that you dispose of your hazardous waste properly, because if they aren't, they can be a huge cause of toxicity and sickness to the environment and people. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next one.